All right, team, welcome to Philosophy 226C, Perspective on Irish Thoughts and History. Obviously, I know most of you, except for the guys, as players, even though I've coached you, Joe. And it's really tremendous to really start this journey. Everything up to this point has been preparation. Preparation in terms of whether we're going to go, how we're going to get approved, where the money's coming from, passports, things like this. But this really is the start of the journey because our goal is not simply to go to Ireland, but to understand something about Ireland. And this course is part of that journey, a critical part of that journey. Okay, so in terms of the course itself, we are going to I'll just go over the syllabus, and we are meeting online. So it's an online course, although there will be some experiential activities. So throughout the course, we're going to have activities, opportunities to learn something more about the Irish culture from a variety of people, and that will be in person. We've got the two books, so A History of Irish Thoughts, which you guys have all been given, and you have, by Thomas Doody. In terms of the emails, in terms of the syllabus, this will be IT, Irish Thoughts, and then How the Irish Saved Civilization by Thomas Cahill. And that's going to go by SC in the emails and the online stuff as well, the syllabus. Okay, so in terms of objectives, three objectives. The first two are the same as any course that I teach. One is to become more thoughtful, to understand yourself at a little bit deeper level. And this time we're going to understand ourselves through the Irish history and people and culture. Two, my second aim is for you to leave this course being able to create better arguments. So you're going to write some short assignments, and you're going to be able to revise those for the end of the class. Third, we've got some content that we want to cover. One, we want to talk about Irish history, and we're going to scan Irish history, because that's all you can do with this kind of time frame. But very briefly look at where the Irish came from. There were settlers on the Irish islands, then a Celtic invasion infiltrated them, and the Celts became the main aspect of the Irish culture for quite some time, and there's been English invasions and Protestant domination as well. So it's an interesting history, and we're going to learn something about that. We're going to learn about how thoughts took root in this island, what it's like to think from the perspective of a colonized and dominated people. We're also going to focus a lot on Catholicism. So what is the nature of Catholicism in Ireland? Is it different or similar to the rest of the Europe? A key figure in Irish Catholicism is, of course, St. Patrick. Obviously, many of you have enjoyed his day, probably through some beers, but he's a really kind of fascinating guy and a tremendous transformer. And so we're going to talk about that. So in terms of some major questions that I want you to think about throughout this course, what are some of the perspectives or worldviews that can be associated with Irish history and Ireland's place in the world? Why is St. Patrick so significant? And what are whom are some of Ireland's greatest intellectual figures, and what have they contributed to thoughts? And finally, the question that Cahill raises in his book, how did the Irish save civilization? Okay, in terms of the evaluation process, so you're going to be graded on 6 different components, and the lowest of those components will drop. One is the discussion board. So each week you have to post at least 4 times, and those posts have to be 5 to 7 sentences each. So if you want to get full credit for the discussion board portion of this class, each and every single week, at least 4 posts, and those posts have to be at least 5 to 7 sentences, and try to make them substantive sentences. One of the posts has to be your response to one of the discussion board prompts. One of your posts has to be a response to one of your classmates or teammates. And then the 2 other responses can either be responses to the post or your teammates. You're certainly welcome to go beyond that and to post more often, but at least 4 substantive posts each week if you want credit. Cultural learning. And the week, by the way, begins at midnight on Monday and ends at 11:59 Sunday. So cultural learning. This is where we try to survey and to sample some of Irish history. And so one portion of this is that you will create a 5-minute video. Topics have been given out. 3 of your teammates have already responded with the topics they would like to choose. So if you want a topic of your choosing, get on it and let me know what you want to do. You're also going to have to respond to your classmates' videos. Just, what you think was interesting, what didn't you know about Ireland before you watched that video, that kind of stuff. The other half of this grade is going to be based upon attendance at some various events that we're going to have throughout the early part of the semester. For example, Professor Miller, Andy Miller, the great history teacher here, will be having a session. Sister Marguerite and Sister Linda are going to do some stuff. There's an NU on tap, so on and so forth. So there's some good stuff coming up where you're going to learn more about the culture. Short assignments. So your short assignment average, what you're going to do, these are written short assignments. In the other video and the other rubrics, I've really detailed what I expect in these assignments. Either written or video form. You're going to have to do 2 of them throughout the semester, and then they'll be graded, and you revise them and return them for a final grade. Quiz averages. So your lowest individual quiz drops, but you will have the average of your quizzes, your top 3 quizzes. So that's going to be based on reading material and some discussion board material. Course reflection. So at the end of the course, you're going to submit a 4 to 5 page paper reflecting on how our tour related to some aspect of the course. Final exam. It's cumulative, and it can either be in a written or oral perspective. I have a page here in the syllabus. I'm just looking at it now. Talking about your grades, conversions, all that kind of stuff. You can look at that yourself. And we begin this week. So week 1, we're going to get a sense of Ireland's place in the world. And both Cahill and Thomas Doody offer similar perspectives on Ireland's place in the world. They approach it a little bit differently, but the end result is similar. And essentially what they're saying is, look, Ireland is mostly a forgotten nation. It's on the edge of the Western civilized world. Throughout most of Western history, Ireland was deemed unimportant, unworthy of much attention. Its peoples were looked down upon. Its peoples were invaded, dominated, enslaved, so on and so forth. It's a history it's a nation that has not produced a great civilization, Thomas Cahill argues. There's no kind of pyramids that they've built. There's no, just incredible tradition of learning. There's no, colonization. They haven't gone out in the world and really spread Ireland to other nations. Although there has been great immigration. So there's not a lot that visibly the Irish could look back upon and be proud of, at least at first glance. But Thomas Cahill also says, look, they did have one shining moment in history. They did have one moment where really all of Western civilization depended upon them. Not often, didn't have many moments, but they did have one, and that moment is really what he focuses his book on. And that's the idea that they saved Western history and Western learning and Western intellectual tradition by copying down some of the key texts from that tradition. Thomas Doody, he focuses also on the idea that Ireland is a second-rate nation. He calls it really a third-world country in many respects because of how poor it has been throughout its history, how dominated it has been. And he essentially said, look, it's a colonized land. And it doesn't have that long, national, sustained, stable culture that you can identifiably point back to and say that's English, or that's German, or that's Spanish. They have a more fragmented history. They have a history where people come and go. They have a history where many people view themselves as accidentally Irish. In other words, mostly they've had kind of English blood, and they view themselves as kind of English settlers on a foreign land. But Doody argues that's to be expected in a nation that is colonized. in a nation that is settled from afar. And he says, far from kind of dismissing this people and this nation, really we should look at them as having an interesting and worthwhile philosophic perspective. Precisely because they are speaking from the lenses and the view of the oppressed and the dominated. Most often that's forgotten in histories. Most often it's the victor, it's the dominator, it's the imperial, it's the nation of power whose histories we learn about. But Duty argues that the Irish actually have something interesting to offer us precisely because of their subjugated status. Okay, so that's a little kind of preview of what you're going to be reading this week. It's a short reading, or short readings this week. In terms of to-dos, you have the readings to do. I'm going to be sending you all a quiz individually. Don't try to cheat because you're all going to have different quizzes, and it's just going to throw you off. There's also these videos that you're watching, the introductory video and the Creating Better Arguments. There's the Creating Better Arguments rubric that I want you to read. And that is pretty much it. So let's begin. Let's start off. And one last final point about this Irish adventure that we're doing, this great experiment. Train as well. So make sure you're running, make sure you're lifting, doing the things you need to do, not only to understand Ireland, but to go over there and play well.